Story 1. I'm hypervigilant about what people say, how they say it, and their facial expressions, always searching for the hidden meaning behind their words. Now that I've had extensive therapy and have a supportive partner, I can usually understand that when my wife says, "Oh, the house could use a vacuum," she is not actually saying, "Get off your lazy ass and do something helpful for once." Story 2. Not the worst by far, but my dad used to yell a lot. Now when people yell at me, I shut down and start crying. I cannot handle conflict at all, and as a result, I accept a lot of mistreatment in life. Story 3. I cannot speak from personal experience, but my father destroyed my brother's self-confidence because he was not interested in sports or college. He is by far the smartest of the three of us, but he will never realize his full potential. Story 4. I was told from day one that I wasn't wanted. I was a mistake. I was born female. My father said fathering a girl reflected badly on him. He said real men sire sons. I spent the first 17 years of my life apologizing for my own existence. To this day, no one has ever told me they loved me or shown any kind of affection for me. I am 67. My dog loves me. Story 5. My parents regularly prioritized themselves and made me feel that asking for anything was a bother. I am now an anxious people pleaser with few friends. I am constantly worried about doing something wrong or annoying others, so it is less exhausting to go it alone. Story 6. I am Chinese, a male, the only son of 4 children, and a widower with no children. I did not become a doctor, a lawyer, or an engineer. Everything I have done, no matter how successful, has been viewed by my parents as a failure. They never told me they loved me or that they were proud of me. All I ever brought them was disappointment. We spoke Cantonese at home. I did not learn the word for love in Cantonese until I was in my 40s, because I never heard it from my parents. I second-guess everything I do. Even when something appears successful, I ask myself whether it is successful enough and whether I did it well enough. Story 7. My mom had her ex-boyfriend beat me while she watched. I am fine for the most part now, but if I do not keep my brain stimulated, the memories come flooding back. Story 8. My parents were in what I would call a cult where church elders abused children. I am still working through that trauma decades later. There were no birthdays or holidays, and the church did not report the abuse to the police. They helped cover it up to protect the church because he said he had repented and remained an elder. It has been hard to get over. Story 9. My mom always had me walking on eggshells, and in some ways, as she approaches 80, she still does. She will ignore my texts and phone calls for weeks, but the moment she wants me, she will call 8 times in a row and ask why I am ignoring her. Story 10. My dad overdosed when I was 11, and my mother overdosed when I was 23. I now have less sympathy for addicts than I used to. I am working on it, and my therapist says being self-aware is a good first step. Story 11. When I was 4 years old, my father made inappropriate comments and favored me over my mother. I have struggled to relate to men in the 38 years since. Story 12. They turned a blind eye while I was bullied at school every day and sometimes joined in. They never said anything encouraging and constantly put me down. They always compared me to other children and rubbed their accomplishments in my face. The only good to come from it was that it taught me how not to treat my children. Story 13. Neglect, verbal abuse, marrying someone who physically abused me, being blamed for many things, immaturity, and lack of accountability. Story 14. My dad had anger issues, possibly obsessive-compulsive disorder, held double standards, and was never satisfied with anything. My mom enabled it all. I couldn't do anything right growing up. He would complain that I did not do chores but would not teach me how to do them. If I took the initiative and did a chore, he would yell if I did anything wrong. It was easier to be called a lazy brat than to endure being shouted at and called an ableist slur for not knowing what dishes could go in the dishwasher or for not being able to pull the lawnmower's ripcord hard enough to start it. I was ridiculed and insulted when I ran crying to my room. I was yelled at whether I asked for help or not. My mom would comfort me with, "You know how your father is." And teachers and other adults brushed me off similarly. Any accomplishment was demeaned and every failure was put on display. I have low self-esteem and my own anger problems. I am stagnant and paralyzed by the fear of trying new things or changing what I am unhappy with. I regularly feel like I am on the wrong path but cannot physically bring myself to do anything about it. I am constantly half-fulfilled. I find my quiet, boring life comfortable but still feel guilty for not doing more. I struggle to care. I feel emotionally dead. I am so used to compartmentalizing my emotions that I do it unconsciously and cannot stop, though I constantly wish I could feel or express more than anger. Story 15. Moving 5 times in 10 years during elementary, middle, and high school makes it difficult to make and keep friends and to form emotional connections to places. Story 16. My mother compared her teenager, who was 120 pounds and 5 feet 8 inches, to herself at 5 feet 5 inches and 200 pounds when it came time to go clothes shopping, at doctor's appointments, in front of hairdressers, and so on. Always in a fat-like-us way, never anything positive. Her mother took every opportunity to repeat those remarks, take food off my plate, and engage in name-calling. My mother did not have the spine to stand up to her, regardless of whether she was drunk. A double whammy. My father's side of the family shows love by pushing food. Binge eating sucks. So does anxiety. Story 17. Religion and family secrets. I don't have a good relationship with Catholicism, though I like to explore other cultures' religions to learn and understand. I have a lot of religious trauma, and having autism made it 10 times worse. As a 6-year-old, all I could think about was that I was constantly going to hell. When it comes to family secrets, I understand there can be a time and place for them, but not when I am an adult and learn that I might have a half-sibling because a babysitter took advantage of my father. I also discovered that his side of the family might not be here today if people had not started investigating murders that took place in the 1920s. Story 18. There was domestic violence and emotional neglect. The father was a raging alcoholic. Story 19. I will use a direct quote from my Child Services File disclosure. It was verified that your mother was aware that your stepfather posed a risk to your safety, but did not act protectively. I left home a month after my 16th birthday because, as he had said for years, I can't kick you out, but at 16 you can legally run away. I have had no contact with my mother for over a decade and have never regretted that choice. My therapist earns her money, though. Perhaps someday I will stop having dreams of trying to get away from them. Story 20. Once, when my sister and I were 7 and 8, my mother had one of her temper tantrums and threw us out of the house. This was shortly before school. My sister had no shoes. We sat at the bottom of the stairway for 10 minutes before we plucked up the courage to knock and ask for shoes. We were going to go to school and accept a beating when we returned. My mother dragged us in, told us to change into normal clothes, and then took us to the train station. She put us on a 1.5-hour train to Edinburgh by ourselves. After we departed, my mother called my aunt and said, "They are your problem now." We did not see her for 6 to 7 months. One of many stories. I am convinced that when she dies, Satan will have competition for ruler of hell. I do not even believe in that stuff. Story 21. My dad was very overprotective of me as a child. He made me terrified of the world. Once I became a teenager, he stopped caring about me. I am still working through this because I have severe social anxiety, which makes it hard to keep a job, stand up for myself, and causes me to be a people pleaser. Story 22. Both of my parents used drugs. I overdosed on methamphetamine twice by age 6. I have post-traumatic stress disorder, anxiety, and depression. These experiences have ruined my life, my confidence, and my ability to function as a normal adult. My mother had multiple abusive partners. My father is now clean and sober and is trying to be a good parent, but I do not speak to my mother. Story 23. I'm a 60s scoop survivor. It's been hard, but I am doing my best in advocacy circles to make sure it doesn't happen to anyone else. Story 24. My dad was a violent alcoholic and used to yell, curse, and call me every name in the book about everything. I go somewhere private to cry. I have been a people pleaser most of my life. I startle easily. I apologize too much. I dated a man-child very similar to my dad for 7 years because that kind of treatment was all I knew. Mental and emotional abuse is not a joke. Story 25. I become enraged when I'm tickled against my will. Now I have trouble enforcing boundaries. I worry that saying no or refusing someone will lead to me being hurt. Story 26. My mother created an environment where if I did not act, behave, or feel the way she wanted, I was doing something terribly wrong and embarrassing her. She worried about how people would perceive her daughter. Often this meant driving to a family function while she yelled at me for being lazy, then yelled at me again for appearing sad, and told me to fix my expression before we arrived. She also made very deadpan jokes about marrying me off to strangers if I did not get my act together and about her expectations for my grades. As a child, I did not take these as jokes and feared her response to any failure, to the point that I still feel scared to do many basic life tasks. I also entered a relationship that was very unhealthy and stayed because I believed that if I were a better person, everything would be fine. I thought I did not deserve a happy relationship until I was the perfect partner who never showed sadness or upset the other person. I wonder where I got that idea. Story 27. Indoctrinating your children is extremely cruel. The way my sisters talk, you would think we had an extra sibling called my religious trauma. Story 28. I am 44 and still trying to figure out how making a friend is supposed to work. I was morbidly underweight until about 30 years old and did not reach a healthy weight until within the last year. Parenting tip: I do not care how many calories a child eats. If they are morbidly underweight, the amount is not enough. They do not need to be accused of gluttony. They need more food. I do not know what joy or physical pleasure feel like. I may be incapable of experiencing either. I do not know the exact breakdown of the causes, but both the abuse and the selective serotonin reuptake inhibitors my parents had me on likely played a role. Story 29. My dad put his hands on my throat when I was 17 because a friend who had slept over the night before left a dish in the sink. My mom broke it up, sent me to the back of the house, called me back to the front, and told me not to tell anyone because my life would be worse in foster care. That was the biggest offense, but in general they could not regulate their emotions, were hyper-religious, should have divorced, and projected their resentment toward each other onto me. This resulted in them verbally degrading me to the point of suicidal thoughts and strong-arming me off the career path I had been on for a decade. They truly crushed my dreams in a literal way. I am 30 now and I am still in therapy. They deny that any of this happened. I moved to the other side of the country, fell in love, got engaged, and made them sit at my wedding, which they paid for. I walked myself down the aisle, did not allow them to give a toast, we did not have a dance, and I left them out of all aspects of the planning. Once I said, I do, I went no contact. I made them pay for my education and wedding, then ghosted them because they almost killed me. No regrets, dude. Fuck those hoes. Story 30. They threw me out at 15 and told the family I had run away. When my grandparents found out I had been sleeping rough, they took me in, but my parents tried to gaslight them. I tried to join the army at 16, but my parents refused to sign the paperwork. There was a long list of incidents before they made me homeless. Story 31. I feel like I had the opposite experience of other people when I was young. I wanted to help my mother clean the house, but she wouldn't let me, which left me without enough cleaning experience in adulthood. Story 32. It is not the worst, but my parents sheltered me, so doing things on my own is difficult. I am learning slowly and making progress. Story 33. He told me at age 9 that it was my responsibility to run the house, cook, and clean because my mother was sick and my 3 younger brothers depended on me. My father was an alcoholic and told me his job prevented him from doing much of anything. Story 34. The only negative thing I can say is something I talked about with my mom that she did not realize was happening. When I was little and got sick, she always seemed angry at me for it. My mom has a resting angry expression, so sometimes she just looks mad even when she is not. I only understood this as I got older, and it has stayed with me my whole life. I'm always worried someone is mad at me, upset with me, disappointed in me, or thinking, what did I do? It has created difficulties with friends and my significant other. Story 35. Being born under the covenant into a high-pressure cult was enough. Story 36. Binge eating and my relationship with food. The adults who raised me were overweight and used food to cope with stress and for enjoyment. I was a very skinny child, then became overweight. After I moved out on my own, I lost a lot of weight and got into excellent shape. I regained some weight during the pandemic. In stressful times, I tend to eat even when I am not hungry, sometimes when I am already full. I also love fast food because I ate it often as a child. I eat too much of it, but I can track calories and stay active enough to remain in good shape. Story 37. Dad was the type of person who kept to himself and tried to be invisible in public. He also had anger issues and yelled a lot. One of my earliest memories, at 3 or 4 years old, is trying to make small talk with some kids at a church music event. He pulled me out of the pew and made me stand facing the kitchen corner for the rest of the day. Experiences like that, repeated over about 20 years, are the main cause of my severe social anxiety, and I deeply resent that part of myself. Story 38. 1. My mother called it benign neglect. 2. She forced me to leave home at 16. 3. She maintained until her death that it had been the right decision. Story 39. My mom shut me down a lot emotionally. I grew up on my older brother's video games, comic books, and action figures. When he moved out for college, he caused me mental and emotional harm, but video games were my passion as a kid. Whenever I tried to talk about them, she would tell me to be quiet and changed the subject. I was about 5 or 6 and I was bullied a lot in school. My mom rarely took me outside or let me play with the neighborhood kids. Even now, as an adult, I cannot talk to her much because she often ignores me when I start talking, yet she wants me to come to her when my depression gets worse. My dad was an absentee parent. He is emotionally unavailable, narcissistic, a cheating alcoholic, and he abused drugs before I was born. He behaved like a man-child. He had 3 other children before me. My older brother hated him. My oldest sister was abused by him, along with her mother. My other sister never had him in her life. I had to deal with him for 15 years, and he is one of the biggest reasons my ex left. I have been working on expressing myself and my emotions, which is still difficult. I tend to shut down when I feel people are not listening. A friend told me I stopped talking mid-sentence because of my mother, I feel like anything I say is not worth hearing. I am trying to be everything my father was not. A good man and a good son, and I am starting to achieve that. Story 40. My dad had an affair and left my mom poor while he became wealthy with his affair partner. My stepmother has always hated me. More recently, a family member told me my dad abused her when she was a child. I guess that is why she abused me as a child too. I believe her completely based on my dad's character. It is hard to understand and to see him as someone who actually cares about me. Story 41. Emotional neglect, lack of guidance on how to be a functioning adult, and being sheltered as a child or teenager led to my mother yelling at me for little things. Now, as an adult, if I make a mistake, I panic because I expect my family to be angry and to yell, since that is what my mother would have done. Story 42. My mother experienced progressive brain deterioration and was largely unable to regulate her emotions throughout my childhood and into my adulthood. Sometimes this led to physical violence. We did not confirm the diagnosis until after she passed. She genuinely could not help herself. It took me a long time to learn how to manage my emotions in a healthy way. I am still learning to stop people-pleasing and to reduce my hypervigilance. It is getting better. Story 43. They sheltered me because of my mild cerebral palsy. I am 40 and, in their eyes, apparently incapable of doing certain things despite doing them just fine. Story 44. Dad. Despite being a caring man, he was mostly absent because of work and emotionally distant due to his harsh upbringing. Mom. She had undiagnosed bipolar disorder and clinical depression. She was an alcoholic for most of my childhood and became sober after I graduated high school. She cared and was a decent parent, but the manic episodes made life harder than necessary. Story 45. My parents praised us for excellent grades and would say things like only 93%? Who did you leave the last 7% for? I understand it's because of how they grew up. Back then, lacking high grades or not studying medicine or law could mean being stuck in poverty. To this day, I struggle with perfectionism, which makes it hard to appreciate my successes. Story 46. I was diagnosed with attention deficit hyperactivity disorder when I was in second grade. I may be on the autism spectrum. I never bothered to find out, but there is a lot of overlap between the two, and it does not matter at this point. I struggled in school, which terrified my parents, so they did their absolute best to shove a square peg into a round hole. I spent every weekday after school with my frustrated parents, often with yelling, as I struggled to focus on homework. I never hung out with friends on weekdays. I never got to watch television, and I had nothing to do but homework from the minute I came home until I went to sleep. If I had homework over the weekend, I did not have a weekend either. My outlet was basketball because my dad liked sports and wanted me to have a normal childhood. It was the only fun thing I was allowed to do on weekdays, and I could only do it when I had practice. When summer came, I was a completely different person. I did not have many friends because it is hard to make friends when you are treated as a weirdo and never get to hang out, so I brought a basketball with me everywhere. I made a Division III roster, but overall my childhood was miserable. I was constantly angry, partly for that and partly because I experienced sexual abuse, which was not my parents' fault. I got in a lot of fights growing up, which only got me in more trouble with my parents. When I barely graduated high school, I was completely alone, with no hobbies and only a few casual friends. My basketball career ended because at 5 feet 11 inches I was not good enough to go further, and I had ankle injuries. After that, my life felt empty. I got a job at a movie theater, made some friends, and started developing into a functioning adult. I eventually started dating, which mellowed me. I went to therapy and anger management at the suggestion of a girlfriend, which helped more. I now coach basketball, train kids in basketball skills, run a YouTube channel on literary analysis, and do some voice acting work. This is the most freedom I have ever had, and it feels really good, although I often feel guilty and panicked when I am not doing something productive. It is a work in progress, but I have to keep going to therapy, and it is nice to help kids learn and love basketball from a much more positive angle than I did. The literary analysis and voice acting are just for me. Story 47. I have no confidence in my ability to choose my clothes, entirely because of the arguments my mother would have with me before church. I solved the problem by stopping attendance at church as soon as I could get a job with Sunday shifts, saying, "Sorry, I have to work." It is not a huge problem, but it remains with me today as I approach 60. Story 48. I was a child who was passed from relative to relative for most of my life under the excuse of visiting, even though it was really because no one wanted me. I would eventually end up back with my parents for a time, and during that period I was physically and mentally abused until my grandparents, who were not much better, took me away. I have a fear of conflict, I constantly self-sabotage, and I have a difficult time believing that I am wanted by my amazing husband. I have been in therapy for nearly a decade for this, and while it is getting better, I am realizing that I am also getting colder. It is painful. Story 49. I'm the glass child, the eldest. Everything in my life was put aside for my brothers. Since I was 11, I was their caretaker, and I was not allowed much of my own. Everything went to my brother: golf clubs and baseball. He was looking to be drafted out of college and attended colleges on scholarships. He had private coaches, basketball in the off-season, video games, outings with friends, and he played travel ball. We traveled all over the East Coast for hours at a time. Packing, cleaning, sorting, driving, hotels, flights. I always expressed interest in art, but my parents would not buy me a new computer or anything a digital artist needs. I often wonder what my life would be like if my parents had shown even a little interest in my interests and put effort into developing my talents the way they did my brothers. When I tried to apply to colleges out of the area because I was looking at an art school, my mother said application fees were a waste of money because I would never do anything. She was right. I was allowed to work only 2 shifts at minimum wage at the local gas station, and my schedule had to fit theirs because who else would watch my youngest brother? My entire existence was chores and caretaking. Cooking meals, packing my mother's lunches, doing laundry, laying out her clothes, making breakfast for the boys, driving my mother to work because she did not like to drive, driving my brother to school, taking care of an infant, picking my brother and mother up from school and work, helping with homework, and packing the infant for practices, games, scrimmages, and events. Repeat. My mother was a nurse, so the biohazard tasks were separate. My father was a welder, so his things were separate because metal burrs can be dangerous. Baseball gear was separate because of red mud and required pre-soaking, pre-washing, and scrubbing before regular washing. I wanted to kill myself. I was miserable and numb. I have no ambitions and little interest outside of video games. I had no time, money, or ability to pursue interests. Every hobby or attempt at one was superficial, no practice, no real progress. Sewing, jewelry making, painting, drawing. None of it went anywhere because I did not have the time. Forget dating. I was 22 and had never been on any dates. I met my now husband working at that gas station by what felt like cosmic chance when I was 22. Maybe the universe had pity on me, and I am grateful for it. Before that, I had only been on a few dates in high school and did not relate to people my own age. I did not know pop culture or what kids my age liked. Now I live on my own with my family, and all I do is chores, dishes, cooking, and taking care of my child. My husband is wonderful. For the first time in my life, I have a digital art pen and the tools to learn to draw. I have a PlayStation and a personal computer for gaming, but I am distinctly lacking ambition or the drive to do anything. I have these things now, yet I often wonder what my art would be doing if I had started 15 years ago. I am in my 30s, and I am fairly certain my upbringing broke whatever it is in normal people that drives them to pursue things they enjoy. Now that I have complete freedom to do what I want day to day and a supportive partner, deep down I have no mental energy for anything beyond what I have always done. I will likely die having done nothing but be a homemaker. I am trying to make peace with that and enjoy my hobbies and my family between loads of laundry and Fortnite matches. Story 50. I was coached on how to act in social situations before it was known that autistic masking is harmful. I have mixed feelings because I have a career, a family, and a home, but I also have depression, anxiety, a binge eating disorder, and no idea who I really am. Story 51. My father did not punish my brother, even though he knew my brother had sexually assaulted me and recorded me while I was showering. Story 52. The next-door neighbor repeatedly had an affair with my father, which broke up both families. They married and combined children from both households. The woman pretended she would be a mother to my sister and me, but she did not. My sister and I ended up at our grandmother's with relatives, friends, or wherever we could. I was smart but had poor eyesight. Then she took over our 4-generation Orange County property and raised her children there. Story 53. My mother rejected my sibling and me at birth and doted on her favorite child. That set the two of us on a path of post-traumatic stress disorder and anxiety that persists. Story 54. I had to go to therapy to learn what feelings were and how to name and feel them properly. I feel like no one on this earth will ever love me, because if my parents did not, how could anyone else? Story 55. Very true. My psychiatrist does not agree, but I find it comforting. Story 56. I was not allowed to receive an attention deficit hyperactivity disorder assessment when I was 5 years old, despite a request from my school. I am only discovering this at 30 years old and feel very far behind. In many ways, I am only now starting to do the things I should have done in my teens. Story 57. My mother was physically and verbally abusive. It took a long time to develop appropriate conflict resolution skills. People around me have always said that I am great under pressure and patient with difficult people, but I adapted to not react when being screamed at because reacting would lead to punishment. This helps in my career, but it has also led me to become a people pleaser. Story 58. I cannot relax. I was raised to always be productive. Time to learn, time to clean. I go to parties and always offer to help. Friends tell me to sit down and talk to my grandmother. My significant other introduced me to certain vape brands, which helped a little, but finding the balance between relaxed and catatonic is a thin line. Story 59. I don't trust my instincts and constantly second-guess myself. I have no connection to my emotions and intellectualize everything. I am a people pleaser. I struggle to set and protect my boundaries, and I suffer from alcohol dependency. This all stems from growing up with an alcoholic mother who identified me as the source of all her problems and took it out on me by undermining my self-confidence, gaslighting me, telling me I was corrupted and that I could not help hurting people, and using a range of manipulative and psychologically abusive behaviors. I also had an emotionally unavailable father whose go-to advice was to try not to trigger my mother and to stay out of trouble. Story 60. My parents had their issues, but I have come to terms with the fact that everyone has their journeys and quirks, even parents. We need to learn to be strong-minded and not internalize things. I do not dwell on the past. I learn from experiences and mistakes. I brush it off, forgive, and live my life unbothered. Story 61. I think the sexual abuse lingers the most. It shows up in many small things in everyday life, from not being able to stand up for myself or feeling that my feelings are invalid, to questioning whether I perceived events correctly or whether I am making them up. Story 62. To all of you, I am sorry you went through this. I hope you are well now. Story 63. My parents had been forgetting to pick me up from school since I started preschool, and it got worse when they separated. Then I would get in trouble if I tried to walk home. Not to mention being forced to continue living next to the man who sexually assaulted me, which led to me being bullied by our entire small town until he was found guilty in court and forced to move. His mother was a pillar of the community, so people thought I was a 9-year-old liar. But it's fine. I definitely didn't have severe anxiety and depression that impact how I form relationships. Story 64. I am the older brother. My younger brother had serious medical issues when he was young, and my father was largely absent as an adult figure. I had to take on adult responsibilities early but was not given the autonomy or independence to match them. My mother was a helicopter parent who prevented me from feeling independent when I was young. As a result, I have people-pleasing tendencies and a lot of shame about inaction and failing to pursue the things I want in life. I am not sure how I will overcome this. Story 65. My mother is a misandrist who was utterly terrified that I would grow up to abuse women. She treated me like a potential rapist when I was a child, and I now have major problems trusting women and forming and maintaining meaningful relationships with them as a result. To be fair, I was mistreated by many women and girls growing up. My mother is just the one who stings the most. Story 66. They fuck you up, your mom and dad. They may not mean to, but they do. They fill you with the faults they had, and add some extra just for you. But they were fucked up in their turn. By fools in old-style hats and coats, who half the time were soppy stern, and half at one another's throats. Man hands on misery to man. It deepens like a coastal shelf. Get out as early as you can, and don't have any kids yourself. This be the verse. Story 67. I was a chubby kid growing up, and my mom was always beautiful and thin. At the beginning of each summer, she would buy me a new wardrobe for the next school year, but she bought it 2 sizes too small and gave me the summer to lose the weight. By the end of summer, I had not lost it. She made me go to the store with her to return the clothes and explain to the cashier why we had to return them. It was humiliating. She still does this. She buys clothes and says I will get into them. Story 68. My mom used to turn off my video games without warning if she did not want me playing them or decided I had played enough. Story 69. My mother was a hoarder and my father was her enabler, which led to me developing obsessive-compulsive disorder. Every day I go through my house room by room to make sure everything is perfectly in its place. A good day is when I only do it twice. A bad day can be 50 or more times. Story 70. My parents never gave compliments but were quick to point out faults. I now struggle to accept a compliment without replying in a way that diminishes it. Story 71. My dad was an alcoholic who was violent and perverted when drunk. My mother enabled him and has borderline personality disorder. I do not trust anyone or their intentions, especially people who drink, even a small amount. Story 72. I often feel I must defend myself about anything I do, so I tend to over-explain my actions and reasons. When making plans, I provide multiple documented sources and check in to ensure people understand and have not changed the plans at the last minute. Story 73. Every time I relax, I hear, "Why are you just sitting there?" echoing in my head. Story 74. They speak 10 or more languages between them and only ever taught us English. It fucking sucks being monolingual when half your family speaks two or more. Story 75. My dad was ultra-religious and forced his beliefs on us. Sometime around age 10, he stopped letting us have Christmas because he said it was about God, not presents. One of the last things that pushed me over the edge was when he said God was number one and family was number two, and that if God told him to kill his family, he would do it. I cannot get over it. Story 76. I have an insatiable need for validation because my mother was not emotionally present during my childhood. I also have the personal relationship skills of a sack of potatoes because we moved so often. I attended a different school every year until high school. Story 77. I am a perfectionist, a people pleaser, and someone who pretends to be fine until receiving a diagnosis because of them. Story 78. I can state this succinctly after all these years. Dad beat me. My stepdad raped me. My mom drank the entire time. Please be kind to your children or give them away. Story 79. My mom was obsessed with healthy food. She would do things like make chocolate pudding for me and my siblings, but then use carob instead of chocolate. The end result looked vaguely correct but didn't taste anything like chocolate. She'd serve me a veggie burger and say it was beef. Dozens of bullshit substitutions like that. She was also a fairly terrible cook. Vegetables were always overcooked. As a result, I grew up thinking I didn't like most foods, afraid to try anything new, and with serious trust issues when it comes to food. I'm now 45 and, while I've made a lot of progress, I'm not remotely over those issues. I hate trying new foods. Most restaurant menus have at most one thing I'm comfortable ordering. If I'm lucky, two. Story 80. I build walls and have a hard time letting people in or allowing them to be close. My dad taught me that some people are only interested in what you can do for them. He showed the most interest in me when he needed to borrow money, needed a place to live, or when he was dying and wanted me to take him from the hospital to my home and, act as his caregiver. It was beyond my capacity. My mom constantly offers opinions that I do not want or need, gets offended when I do not ask for her input, and takes it upon herself to call my spouse and give a third-party opinion on situations where she should mind her own business. I now tell her very little, only the most mundane things. Story 81. My parents sold drugs out of our house and allowed known child molesters to babysit. They were drug addicts and made me the only real adult in our family of 4 when I was 10. Story 82. I remember passing fields where people were harvesting food and being told to get an education so I would not be like them. Those people work hard and deserve our respect. Story 83. My dad would fly off the handle over everything. I have severe anxiety now, and my fight or flight response activates for the most routine tasks. Story 84. They accidentally made me a motivational speaker. I was diagnosed autistic in 2005 in a small town where people did not know how to help. My parents were probably on the spectrum and never realized it, so they carried a lot of shame, which I picked up and carried too. I handled it differently. I started writing about it, got into self-publishing, and ended up on a statewide speaking tour about how I was not damaged or deficient. In the ways people treated me, I did not want to be normal. I just wanted to be part of the world. It helped some people. I spoke on a panel with Temple Grandin at her movie premiere. Sometimes I would speak at high schools and get hundreds of friend requests on Facebook. I did not think I was remarkable, but my parents called me a special case and said I gave people hope. Years later, my therapist asked why I seemed to have something like child star trauma. My mom needed to believe I was one of the special ones, and my parents constantly created a bubble around me. They always introduced me as their autistic son and warned people about my quirks before we met. I was excitable, talkative, and did not care about eye contact. Teachers held special meetings about me every year and often separated me from my class, as if I was not socially isolated enough. There was talk about whether I would need to be put in a home when I grew up. Meanwhile, I was reading at a college level in 3rd grade, picked up quantum physics textbooks in middle school for fun, and literally writing novels and manifestos in high school. It seemed like there were 2 of me, the version that was irredeemably inept and damaged, and a superhero version that was special in a good way. I hate that word. When I became a full adult, I began to realize how much my parents struggled with relationships and how they were ashamed of parts of themselves we shared. I started to understand where the self-loathing came from. My father's military voice forcing eye contact still rings in my ears. They needed external validation that they were normal enough, and I was proof that none of us were. That put the burden of proving I was an exception on me. There is also a whole messed up corner of my mind about whether I am worthy of a romantic partner because of my disability, but that is another long story. I have read a lot of disability theory and come to terms with it. It is nice to have clarity about the shame I see so many others struggle with now that autism is more widely diagnosed and addressed in social settings, but it is hard to talk about. It is not exactly a relatable experience. Most people just think it is cool and see it as proof of an adventurous life. Story 85. When I was a suicidal, self-harming 12-year-old, I tried to open up to my parents. They threatened to send me to our motherland, made jokes about my self-harm, and told me my problems were all in my head. I have severe trust issues and struggle to open up to people. Story 86. My dad was dirt cheap and refused to buy name-brand items. We had more than enough money to afford them. He just thought they were overpriced. Through most of elementary school, we were constantly made fun of for wearing Walmart shoes. That should not happen. My father was not going to solve the worldwide problem of bullying just because he thought Nike and Adidas shoes were overpriced. The first 5 years of elementary school were miserable until my parents divorced and my mother let us buy normal clothes and shoes. The bullying stopped. My whole life improved almost overnight because of shoes. I cannot read the frugal subreddit because it is full of overly idealistic parents who do not understand reality. Story 87. They took on debts and obligations they didn't want to fulfill, and then transferred them to me while I was still young and didn't know any better. Story 88. My dad has always blamed my mother for every problem my siblings and I had while he did not put effort into raising us. I am grateful the bills were paid and we never went hungry, but we missed him emotionally. My mother has not gotten over her traumas, so she continues to play the victim and manipulate us to get her way. Because her marriage to my dad was terrible and she has not found happiness with a partner, she criticizes her 3 daughters' marriages, especially when we put our husbands first. Story 89. They told me to tell them whenever my sister picked on me, only to ask why I listened to her. They let her get away with not doing chores while I couldn't skip mine, yet they still claim they don't play favorites. Story 90. My father was always placating my mother, and I found myself in a similar marriage in every way, including buying a house I never should have bought. Story 91. They knew I was autistic but never had me tested, which damaged me for life. I was not diagnosed until I was 25. They neglected me, emotionally and verbally abused me, were ableist, and did not accommodate my support needs as a disabled person. They traumatized me and damaged my mental health so severely that they were the main contributing factor to my years-long autistic burnout, and they were also a major factor in my being suicidal since I was 12. They taught me that my needs, feelings, and mental and physical health do not matter, and that nobody cares about me. They obliterated my self-esteem and made me feel unlovable. So now I am a people pleaser in order to feel loved, needed, and wanted. My mother is truly despicable. I have never hated anyone more than I hate her. Story 92. They instilled a shame complex in me by punishing my dysregulated behavior related to neurodivergence and attention deficit hyperactivity disorder, and by using religious messages telling me that good boys don't act that way. They failed to recognize that the way I processed the world indicated a deep need for therapy as a child. Story 93. I was left with untreated, undiagnosed autism and attention deficit hyperactivity disorder. My father drank, my mother abused pills, and my grandmother subjected me to daily psychological abuse. Everyone treated my brother like a golden boy, even though he was not interested in them. I was the black sheep. Story 94. My father was sarcastic with me for not knowing things when I was younger than 6 years old. I still remember specific examples, including the first time I realized he did not mean what he said. I grew up jaded and sarcastic, and I am still trying to stop myself from being that way. Story 95. Parents divorced when I was 5. My father would pick me up on weekends and take me to bars while he drank. For my birthdays, he took me to the horse racetrack and gambled. When I was about 13, he would send me to the illegal bookie joint to place bets for him if he was working. The place was like a scene from The Godfather. A cigar shop in front, a secret buzzer to let me into the back room where I placed bets with Carlo or Vito. I have been a functioning alcoholic for most of my adult life. I find myself hanging out in bars for no reason. Recently, I had to buy a small rental home for him because he lost everything and I refused to move him into my house and jeopardize my marriage. The strange thing is that everybody around town loves him. He buys their drinks and throws parties. He makes friends easily. People have actually told me I need to take better care of him. It is hard to know what stories he has told them, since he tends to lie or exaggerate. I love him, and as strange as it sounds, I will miss him when he is gone. Story 96. High expectations to be perfect and accomplished. Story 97. My parents made me hate authority because they were so strict and always made me feel like I was in trouble. They messed up my social development, so now I have to relearn how to socialize properly as I approach 30. I am more assertive now and challenge them more often, sometimes too much. Now they have the gall to tell me to calm down instead of yelling like they would have before. They still try to blame me for things that are their fault, and when I call them out, I am told to calm down instead of them admitting a mistake. I don't know why that is so difficult for people. Story 98. I was put on medication and institutionalized for attention deficit hyperactivity disorder. I spent over 4 years in medical lockup at 5 different facilities. As an adult, I have not needed medication to manage attention deficit hyperactivity disorder, but I still have nightmares about what I went through. If you have ever seen the study in which sane people admitted themselves to an asylum to test how easy it would be to convince staff they were sane, it is not at all easy. Story 99. One died. The other lost themselves and effectively died as well. Story 100. My mom was abusive and neglectful. Her love was conditional. My dad committed suicide when I was 17. There is a lot to work through, but I am getting better. Story 101. My first memory of my dad was him hissing at me in church. If I can't hear you singing, God can't hear you singing. Our relationship has not improved in 32 years. Story 102. I would not say my mother harmed me, but she was emotionally unavailable while I was growing up. She had a comment for everything I did, which made me question myself, and I still question myself at 31. She is not like that anymore. Story 103. My father was a police officer and extremely abusive. I was spanked for everything. He would write the date, time, and reason on the paddles and hang them on the kitchen wall. I was taught to be seen as his little trophy and never to speak unless spoken to. I was embarrassed in public countless times. One example. After getting out of a public pool, he yelled in front of a crowd, "Look at that tater sack in those shorts. What are you hiding, boy?" When my parents divorced, he shoved explicit photos of my mother with her new boyfriend in my face when I was just 11 years old. Friends who were private investigators had taken the pictures and given them to him. I could go on, but it was not until this year that I finally said screw it and began to move past the residual effects of his abuse. I have always lived by the rule, I am not my father, and have made sure never to act like him. I hated any attention being drawn to me and did everything I could to be invisible in public. I am working on that now. I have lost over 60 pounds, completely changed my wardrobe and style, and I am learning to be happy and not care what others think, at least in some ways. Thanks a bunch for sticking around till the end of the video. Remember to subscribe, and until next time, stay awesome and goodbye.